Don Beyer has served the people of Virginia's 8th Congressional District for 6 terms. Now he's going for number 7. Before that, he was Lieutenant Governor of Virginia and Ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein. He is currently an upperclassman at George Mason University working toward a master's degree in machine learning, which has quite a bit to do with AI, which we'll dive into. Welcome, Mr. Beyer. Glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Simone. Thanks for the invitation.
Let's talk about you being a student. So what are you studying right now?
Well, I finally got into the graduate courses. I had to take a bunch of undergraduate computer science, so I didn't know them before. But it's very challenging. Yeah. I love my classmates. The professors are very good. And hopefully in 2 years or so, I'll actually have that degree.
You know, as you learn more about AI, I mean, does it make you more nervous? Does it make you embrace it more? What's it been like to study it up close?
It's been, the most important thing, I think, is it's gotten me in the room with the most important AI leaders in the country right now. The computer science skills I have will not allow me to be an AI leader, but I'm hoping that the mixture, along with the congressional service, I can have an impact on what AI does to our jobs, to our healthcare, even to our safety.
Well, speaking of that, data centers, synonymous with AI in many ways. Your data center bill essentially tries to protect the ratepayers, right? So it tries to stop residential ratepayers from subsidizing big tech's electricity, their power needs. The Trump administration's answer to this was a voluntary pledge from companies like Google and OpenAI to essentially fund their own infrastructure. My question to you, is voluntary enough, or does this need to be made into law?
I don't think voluntary is enough, because you will get good players. You know, maybe a Google or an Anthropic that will do that. But there'll be a lot of other people in the data center space. We've had data centers around for quite a while. They grew up in Loudoun County in the 90s and the 2000s. But now that they're exploding, we have many, many different players. It needs to be in the law.
Let's talk about, in community debates and forums, something that your competitors in this primary, an issue that they have raised, is that it's time to let somebody else hold the office, to pass the torch, so to speak, to a new generation of leadership. What's your reaction to that?
I think that's always a fair thing to raise. But I feel young, vibrant. I mean, as I'm studying, I just finished the Appalachian Trail last year. And I really am excited. We have the opportunity to take back the Democrats, the House, and even possibly the Senate this year. So legislation I've worked on for a number of years that's ready to go. It will never pass in a Donald Trump or a Mike Johnson House. But so I'm eager to actually get closure on some of these things.
So what can you accomplish with another term as you look forward, you know, to the primary? If voters send you back to Washington, what are you looking forward to accomplishing that you have not yet done?
Well, we very much want to do affordability. Right now, you have 2/3 of Americans that can't afford their groceries. Overwhelming number of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. I have the lead of one of the most important bills to take back tariff authority from Donald Trump to the Congress. Like the 50% tariff he announced last week against Canada. These are crazy things that are driving up costs for everyone. I am the co-lead of the big bill on low-income housing tax credits, which, if we can pass it next year, will be 2 million more homes over the next 8 years. And I have been leading the effort on fusion energy for the last 4 or 5 years. We can actually pass that next year, which will bring us much closer to having much lower energy costs for all Americans for the rest of our lives.
You know, I wanted to build off of what you were just saying, because something that we just hear consistently from Virginia voters is affordability, affordability. It's too high. You know, we can't afford to live in this community. Inflation, housing, groceries, childcare. You have argued for expanding the child tax credit, building more affordable housing, as you were talking about, raising the minimum wage, and requiring wealthy Americans to pay more in taxes. What is the single biggest thing Congress can do that would actually put more money back into your constituents' pockets?
I think that the biggest single thing would probably be first taking AI and making it human-centered. You know, the great fear right now is it could eliminate some millions of jobs. We can't let that happen. We also need to raise the average income that people have. When so many people have been left behind, you mentioned I was ambassador to Switzerland. When I left there 13 years ago, the average minimum wage was $48,000 a year. So they didn't have a lot of transfer payments. They didn't have lots of things like SNAP benefits and Medicaid because people could afford it. So what we need to do is rethink what capitalism means in the 21st century in America and make sure everybody can work full time and have enough to live.
How vital is bipartisanship to that?
Very, very bipartisan, very necessary. You know, the things that we do just one party at a time, the next party they get in power and they try to reverse it.
They dismantle it.
And the things that have lasted are things we did together.
I wanted to talk to you. I've been speaking with some of your primary opponents in this Democratic primary coming up. 3 of your primary opponents have pledged not to accept corporate PAC money. They've pledged to support banning congressional stock trading, and they've made your fundraising a central issue in this race. You are one of the wealthiest members of Congress. If you have the personal resources to self-fund, why continue to accept corporate PAC money?
Well, first of all, corporate PAC money is not that much different. It's not corporations. It's the people who work in the corporations, who work in businesses. And that's the way they have a voice. They can give their $25 or their $100 through their corporate political action committee. Those corporate PACs, as they call them, are the same as the labor PACs and the PACs of the doctors and the dentists and the nurses and the airline pilots. Also, I'm all for getting money out of politics. But as long as Republicans can accept the PAC money, it's crazy for us to unilaterally disarm. One of the things my opponents typically don't mention is I spend almost none of that money on my campaigns. I give it all to people who are running in very poor districts across the country. So I have been the biggest giver, certainly in this area, for the longest time. So
with some of the corporate PACs, so I hear you generally employee-funded PACs are also part of your campaign finance. If we're talking about maybe some of the defense ones, those corporate PACs, why should voters believe that those donations don't influence your priorities? What would you say to them who might be nervous?
Well, no one can point to a single vote I've taken in the last 11 and a half years that has been tied to a specific gift or even a category of gifts. First of all, even those corporate PACs, like let's think BAE or Boeing, those are the employees that are giving the money, not the corporations that are doing it.
Okay.
By the way, I give money, a lot of this money is going to Democratic candidates around the country who don't take PAC money of any kind. They're happy to take it from me.
I see.
And when we can ban that, then I would be happy to live up to that. But literally to say Republicans can do this and we can't puts us at an enormous disadvantage.
I got you. All right, let's talk about Iran, war powers. I wanted to touch on this because you supported the Iran war powers resolution. You've called on Congress to withhold the administration's $90 billion in funding request until there's a clear path to peace. How do we get out of Iran, in your opinion? As you look forward, to the months ahead, what comes to mind here? We
have to go back to the diplomatic table, the negotiating table. You mentioned I was ambassador in Switzerland, and I was a part, not the central part, of the negotiations with China, Russia, Germany, France, and England, and the United States to get the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That was the big treaty that we got done in 2016 that kept them from getting nuclear weapons for the decades to come. And brought peace. Donald Trump tore it up in 2017. We need to recreate that, and that's the only thing that's going to bring peace. Otherwise, this kinetic thing, dropping bombs on each other, is 6 months today. Well, and it could go on forever.
I thought it was interesting. You've said, the president and Mr. Hegseth, Pete Hegseth, have no idea what the plan is to end the war. Concerning to you, to say the least. Yes, can you elaborate on that?
Well, they said 2 weeks, and now it's 6 months.
Right.
And Iran says they don't want to come back to the table, although they will, because they know they need to. In the meantime, we've used up an enormous amount of our stocks and military supplies that, according to General Dan Kane, could take it decades to rebuild.
You have voted in regard to Israel. You have voted to restrict some U.S. security assistance to Israel and said the U.S.-Israel relationship needs to be reevaluated. What should that relationship look like going forward, in your opinion?
I think we need to change the leadership in Israel. Israel has to change it. They have an election coming up on October 27th. I want Israel to succeed. I want there to be a strong Jewish democracy. I have many wonderful, wonderful, dear American Jewish friends. But I'm concerned about the rise in anti-Semitism here in America and around the world, driven by Netanyahu's policies. The way they waged the war in Gaza, and the way they don't protect the Palestinians in the West Bank, and the bombing of Beirut, all have driven most nations away from Israel. We need to change that.
Should future military aid be conditioned on Israel's actions in Gaza specifically?
Or overall. I wouldn't say Gaza specifically, but the overall relationship. It's taken us a long time to get to conditioning aid to Israel. It's been unconditional for decades and decades. But we've also seen that without asking them to live up to the values I think we share, things have gone in the wrong direction.
All right, let's talk about health care. That is a primary concern for many of our voters. Health insurance costs are rising after the expiration of enhanced ACA subsidies. You have supported both Medicare for All and the Choose Medicare Act, which would allow people to buy into Medicare. Given the political reality in Congress, which approach is achievable and how would it lower costs for families?
Well, if you could actually get Medicare for All, which is a single-payer system, like much of the rest of the world has, it would dramatically drop costs. First of all, a significant percentage of the 20% of our GDP we spend on healthcare, it goes to profit for insurance companies. That would completely get out of it.
How do you
get
pay
rid of
for
so
it?
much of the fraud.
What would your proposal be to pay for something like that?
Well, first of all, I always like Teddy Kennedy's idea, which is you took this Medicare age, which is 65 right now, and you drop it to 64 this year and 63 the next year, and you phase it in. You actually then save a great deal of money. Because by the time people get on Medicare, they're often so sick that they end up using many more resources than they have before. We also have to drop back and look and say, so much of our 20% of GDP, why not make it 14 or 12%, which you could do by the efficiencies of not having all the insurance companies and the big hospital centers into it.
So what I'm hearing you say is not an obvious, I would raise taxes egregiously in order to pay for it.
No, I don't think, people are paying that money already.
Okay.
I mean, it's going out. For example, I just think about it as a small business person in the DC area for a long, long time. A big part of our expenses are health care for the employees. All of a sudden, that would go away, which means people could then, I could use that money not to raise profits, but to drop prices for the customers, or even better, to raise incomes for the employees.
Let's talk about federal layoffs. Your Democratic primary opponent, Michael Duffin, is a former employee. He was an employee with the state. He was laid off in the DOGE cuts. He says your response to the federal workforce cuts fell short. He said Northern Virginia needed a fighter and that reinstating fired federal workers hasn't been a central part of your legislative agenda. Would you like to respond to that?
I think Michael thinks that he can get elected and everyone will be hired back. Unfortunately, we live in a democracy, and right now one that's controlled by the Republicans, about the House and the Senate. I've done everything anybody has ever suggested that I do. I've had job fairs, I've had resource fairs, we've done training. I have major pieces of legislation that would hire back those employees, but we live in a Congress that's run by Republican Mike Johnson, so they haven't passed.
I've got to ask you about ICE, because you co-introduced the ICE Visibility Act, requiring agents to wear clear identification during operations. How would this law change what people see on the ground? Would that really make enough of a difference, in your opinion?
No, it wouldn't make a total difference, but the three things that really upset people, number one is no names, you don't know who it is. Sure. Number two is the masks and the unidentified cars. We've never had that in 250 years. And number three is the warrantless entries, which clearly is unconstitutional. You've always been, even a lot of police, if they want to come to your house, my house, have to get a warrant. But overall, we need to tear ICE down and rebuild it, because the culture has gotten beyond belief.
I wanted to ask you about the Democratic Party. We hear from some voters who are saying very clearly that they do not think Democrats are doing a good enough job, let's say fighting President Trump on his policies, his legislative agenda. Do you think the party's approach needs to change? And if so, how?
I don't think so. I mean, there's always ways we can improve. We don't do things perfectly. I do sense a great deal of frustration among the people that I represent that we have not been able to stop the corruption and the excesses and the lawlessness of Donald Trump and the Pete Hegseths of the world. It's a frustration we all share. We also live in a land of laws, and we're under the rule of law. So unless we want to take to the streets with knives and guns and burning sticks, we have to go at it through the political process, which is why these elections are so very important.
Okay, as we put a bow on it, what would you say to voters in this final push ahead of the Democratic primary?
Well, I very much, the fulfilling part of my life is to be able to serve the voters of Northern Virginia and of the whole country. And I try to do the most thoughtful, meaningful things I can. I'm eager for a chance to try to finish that job.
All right, Mr. Beyer, thank you so much for joining me today. Certainly appreciate you being here and talking with us. Good luck in your studies as well.
Thank you very much, Simone.